Welcome to the Prime Property Finance Podcast with Gareth Morgan and Mark Watts. This unique podcast will dive deep into all areas of property investing finance, going behind the scenes with property professionals, investors and clients. Between us, we have 35 plus years experience in property finance. The podcast has been launched to share knowledge, mindset requirements and experiences of successful investors and professionals. We aim to simplify many of the complicated areas of finance and investing and provide valuable and easy to implement tips. Keep an eye out for our new longer episodes every Tuesday and our shorter ones every Friday. Welcome to part 2 of our Bridging Finance Masterclass. Let's dive right in. Hope you enjoy. When we're coming at this with the BRR mindset, this goes back to what we said earlier about being clear on what your criteria are, because just because it's been downvalued, it means that what that might mean is that you get less money out at the end. Well, depending on your criteria, that may not be a game changer for you or not, or a deal breaker. Just because it's been downvalued, it just means your ROI drops a little bit, but it's still within your criteria. That means the deal can still go ahead. But for other people, that down valuation might mean that it is a deal breaker because it's now pushed outside of their criteria. So again, it depends on the client. All right, cool. Well, look, we've covered a fair bit there, and I know we're going to cover some of those items a lot more in detail in the future. So if we look now on to the refurb element, and whilst it's called buy, refurbish, refinance at a high level, renovate it could be called. I'm also one that to point out at this point, it doesn't necessarily need to be a refurb that needs to happen. We covered that a little bit at the moment, but if we just talk, I always say add value. How do we add value? Let's buy a property, let's add value to it, and then refinance it if the goal is to keep it, of course. So, if we look at some of the ways of adding value, yes, in the main is a refurb. And like you just described, that could be a light refurb. It can be a heavy refurb. It could be some sort of development. So you could be building extension. Then you move into the more commercial things. So you've got commercial to residential, and that could be any sort of commercial property, and then converting that into residential apartments or houses. You've got a residential and converting that into a HMO. The other common ones that we see are from a planning gain. So you're going to, again, and the commercial to residential is a planning gain of sorts, but you might buy a piece of land, put in planning permission, get the planning, and then that's increased the value. So then you can either go and sell that land with planning for a gain, or start then developing it out. The other one that we see, which is quite common, is lease extensions. So there's lots of apartments and flats all over the country which are leasehold. They've been around for a long time and the leases are sort of coming to an end. The owners don't have the cash to actually buy the extension on the lease and are then trying to offload it. But these are also properties that tend to be probate properties as well, because they've been in the family, the person's lived there most of their life, the family don't want anything to do with it, they don't want to extend the lease, or they can't afford to extend the lease, and they're looking to sell those properties. So with the right buyer coming in, understanding how lease extensions work and being able to fund the lease extension, they could do zero refurb whatsoever, but add significant value to that property through the lease extension. So it doesn't always necessarily need to be, like you said, a refurb necessarily in order to add value. Can you think of any others that might fall into that category?
Yeah, definitely. So on the residential side, you've got title splitting. So if you've got a block of flats that's on a multi-unit block, it's valued with a discount because as a block, it's only, when you think about how you sell it, you can only sell it to an investor effectively. Nobody's going to buy that as a home. Title splitting then means that you open it up to the whole of the market. Therefore, you'll get an uplift in value, often 10, 15%, something like that. The other one, which I thought you were going to say, but commercial. So if you buy a commercial property with an existing tenant and you renegotiate the lease, some commercial valuations are based on the quality of the lease. So you can literally just or sweat the asset, as they call it, which is what asset managers will do, renegotiate the terms of the lease, which in turn will increase the value of the property. So a lot of these appear to be more paper exercises than actually getting your hands dirty, hacking off walls and building extensions.
Yeah, I think asset management is a big opportunity at the moment. There's lots of commercial properties potentially that are unloved or empty or vacant, especially now with people looking to offload things with changes potentially to the inheritance tax bandings, plus people paying empty property rates on empty commercial properties. So there is definitely opportunities out there within the commercial space. Again, it's not necessarily a conversation for now into the nuances of that, but that is a massive space. And like you said, asset management is mainly a paper exercise rather than a refurb exercise.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, great. Well, look, we won't add too much to that. We're not when it gets into the refurb elements, we can talk about the refurb side of things, and that's something that we'll always ask the question of people of what is the refurb and how much is it. Probably just the one point to note that we see a little bit of is people not fully understanding the costs of refurbs. When we talk about refurbs, people oftentimes will come in with a finger in the air figure for a refurb because they did something 10 years ago, and the costs now through the cost of living, increase in materials, you've got the war in Ukraine, inflation, there are so many reasons why costs have gone up, and the cost of labor and the cost of materials have increased, that it is really something that you need to drill down on, because developments and refurbs, heavy refurbs where there's a lot of work involved, they can be made or broken by the refurb. So having some professionals on board, a QS or a builder that has that QS element within it, can really drill down and understand your numbers, because when you're looking at bigger developments, the price per square foot or the price per square meter, but oftentimes people just consider the refurb part of it, and then they don't consider all the professional fees, the insurances, the warranties, and everything else that goes with it. So again, that's a conversation for another day to go into deeper, but the key for me is for people to really understand the refurb element and what that looks like.
Yeah, 100%. Couldn't agree more. If you're going to use refurb finance, one of the comments, the commentary in the valuation report will be for them to look at the numbers that we've presented for the refurb costs, and the valuer will comment on whether those are realistic or not, and then will comment on what they believe them to be. So they'll either agree or disagree with you. Now, if you're doing a refurb, say 40,000, valuers will start to comment on that then. If you're doing it for 20, then it's not so important. So this number doesn't have to be particularly large. I know 40,000 is still a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of property, it's not. Is that will be tested at the valuation stage. So just be realistic with it, because you don't want to spend that money, get yourself to a point where I've got one on the table at the moment where the bill costs have come back from the valuer a third higher, and it's broken the deal. Now it's cost nearly £4,000 to get to that point, with valuation fees, application fees, and so on and so forth. We're not there to tell you that your refurb costs are wrong. We're just there to say, are you sure? And so on. So bear that in mind. Also, something else to consider is, if you were doing the works yourself, say you're a builder that's clearly got the skill set to be able to do this and deliver it, that refurb cost may be 100,000, but you using because you're not paying for labor or anything anymore, it's just materials in effect, you can get it done for 50,000, for example. Bear in mind the lender may not accept that, and the reason for that is if you don't complete that project and the lender has to step in and recover that property, they won't just sell it part complete, they'll finish it themselves, and more often than not. They'll then have to employ another builder. Now that builder won't be doing it without the labour costs. Therefore, they will budget that into the actual equation. So whilst we know you can do it cheaper, in reality, the lender has to protect themselves. So again, run your numbers as if it was a third party doing it. Yes, you will save it, but you have to be realistic. You could, the other thing as well, if you're being pessimistic about it, you could get injured during the process and have to employ somebody else. There are reasons why you can't finish your own project and so on. So just bear that in mind. And the other piece that I would say on the refurb element is RICS, RICS, who are the governing body for surveyors, or the regulatory body for surveyors, or all things surveying. They do have a pound per square foot table in effect, which will lend itself to different geographical areas. Obviously, the pound per square foot to build in central London is quite different to the pound per square foot to lend in Neath in South Wales. So again, geographical nuances will exist as well. So, and we do see a lot of investors that will have accumulated money because they live in an affluent area, but realize investing in that area perhaps doesn't make financial sense and will invest outside of their areas. So understanding what that pound per square foot bill cost is going to be is key. And one other, before I stop talking, is bear in mind the finish that you're going to do. So the appliances and so on, you can really run away with that. Understanding your audience when you go to refinance it or sell, you don't have to put high-end fixtures and fittings in everything if your market doesn't demand it, but that can materially blow out your build costs or your refurb costs just by getting carried away. You're not doing this to live in it yourself. You're doing it to give it to someone else to occupy.
Yeah, great points. Yeah, thanks for that, Mark. Okay, let's move on then to the last part of this model, which is the refinance element. And again, going back to keeping it at a high level, buy, refurbish, refinance. Just probably a point to note here is that it doesn't have to be a refinance. This model works for flipping properties or selling them on for a profit. So you buy them, you add value through the aforementioned options and avenues, and then sell it. So you can just go straight back on the market. You could sell it at auction. You can sell it on the open market. You might have a seller lined up before you actually buy the property. I know a lot of developers now are, before they even start developments, they are engaging with housing associations, government organisations to buy the properties off them before they even put a shovel in the ground. So there's lots of different routes to do this type of deal. But we're keeping it simple for the main type of investor and landlord that we deal with, where they're looking to build a portfolio, they buy, refurb, and then refinance. What type of refinances, again, what kind of deals and strategies are we looking at here?
So, the answer is always going to be mortgage at this point. The property is ready for long-term finance. You've done the short-term hard work, if you like, and now, you put in a longer-term solution for that. Now, the type of mortgage will be determined by the occupancy of the property. So what I mean by that is a HMO is an occupancy type, a single let where you just put a family in and that's it. It's your simple buy to let. That is an occupancy type. You might have a corporate tenant that wants to occupy a residential property. That's an occupancy type. That'll sit in a commercial lease. Social landlords or social landlords, that's an occupancy type. You've then got commercial property, there's an occupancy type that will sit in there. So that occupancy type that I said quite a few times is going to be the key driver ultimately to how you will get a mortgage or what mortgage you will raise against. It will also, and we haven't really spoken about valuations yet, but it will also drive the valuation methodology that's going to go into it as well, and what you can expect to get on the refinance element of the property. So, it's going to be a mortgage, but it's ultimately going to be based on the occupancy.
And again, this is what I talk about in terms of our jobs as brokers to come in and when clients propose a deal to us, we want to get understanding of the deal at the outset. So what is the project? Explain it to us. What is the deal and what are you trying to do? And as they kind of explain and show us their numbers and explain what the plan is, any broker worth their weight, as I mentioned earlier, would be really getting to grips with the exit. What is this property? What are you going to do? And how are you going to pay off this? If it is a bridging loan, how are you going to pay it off? And, there's a couple things that you probably didn't mention there, but one is residential. Lots of people, you might see an ideal lifetime home at auction that isn't mortgageable, and you think, well, I fancy living there, and that would be an ideal property for our family home, and your dream home, but it's just not in the condition where you can get a mortgage on it. So you could get a bridging loan to buy that property. You can renovate it, and then eventually you can move into it, remortgage it on a residential basis, and live there as your primary residence. So people can and often do use the BRR model for their family home. The great thing about using this model for your family home is that it's tax-free. And so you can do that, you can flip it on, you can move into another one, you can live in it as you do it up, or you can live with your in-laws potentially whilst you're doing it up, which I'm doing at the moment. So there is a bit of method to the madness, but it comes with its challenges at the same time. But that's probably not something we'll dive too deep into now.
Cost of doing business, I think they call that.
That's right. But it's a great time, and we're enjoying it. So
you're only saying that in case they listen.
Exactly. And then other things, serviced accommodation or holiday let is a really common one, and supported living. So if I just touch on those two as an example, both supported living and serviced accommodation are probably a little bit more advanced investment strategies. And if you are a first-time landlord presenting a deal to us, you're a first-time investor, and you're presenting a deal to us for the first time, and you say, right, this is a deal I want to do. I want to convert this into an 8-bed HMO, and I want to put a supported living lease in place at the end of it. The conversation for us will be very different, or we'll have to highlight some issues within that quite quickly to say this probably isn't a deal for you on your first deal, because you haven't got experience. And the issue isn't getting the bridge to purchase, it's actually getting off the bridge at the back end. It's the exit, and this is why the exit is so important. And people will say, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. I might do a HMO, I might do a serviced accommodation. They're very different things. They're different planning classes, depending on where you are in the country. And it's really needing to know the nuances of how that exit will look. Again, is it going to be buy to let, which is a bit more straightforward? Are you doing it through a company, or are you doing it in your personal name? Because if we take serviced accommodation, there aren't huge amounts of lenders that will do serviced accommodation in a limited company. Is it a multi-unit block as well? You start adding these layers of complexity to the deal, and that's where, your broker will be able to talk you through all of the different options available depending on what you plan on using this property with. And of course, things change, as you go through a deal. The market might change, circumstances might change. You might hear some news might appear that might make a certain strategy better halfway through the deal, and those things can change. But what is your number one main intention when you buy this deal? What is the plan for it long term? And that makes our job a lot easier to make sure that we can get you the finance that you need to get off it once you've completed the project.
Yeah, and also being realistic and understanding the cost of that finance. So doing a single let, if as a first-time landlord, or let's say it's your second buy-to-let property, you're not a first-time landlord. It's quite vanilla in so much that you're going to put in a family in there, professional family, whatever. You'll have the whole of market. You've got a job, all of that. You're going to have the whole of market ultimately to shop in, and your interest rate's going to be relatively low in comparison to other products. Whereas as you move up the spectrum then of complexity, that costs. So everything is risk and reward. So lenders' interest rates reflect the risk they're taking. So if you move up the spectrum and into the more specialist lenders, that's why the price goes up, because they take in bigger risk, more complex deals. And have you actually budgeted the correct interest rate? Because you might get to a certain point on the refinance where you've budgeted that on 4% and it's actually 7 per annum. That can be a material difference in the income that you're going to generate and the ROI and so on and so forth. It may, I've had conversation with people where they felt like it's just not been worth it at the end. I mean, there is a degree of reframing that needs to go on there as well, because they still have taken most of their money out and the ROI would still be a lot better than if they stuck it in an ISA, for example. But just understanding what that looks like on the refinance will stave off disappointment when you get to the mortgage element and go, I thought it was going to be cheaper than that.
Yeah, great. And like you said, I think we've covered a lot then, different elements of it. And the key part of, speaking to a broker, and that can be us or it can be somebody else, to understand what those rates are likely to be on the exit, so that you put in those figures into your due diligence at the front end, so that you haven't got any nasty surprises once you've done the deal. Again, all of that forms part of the due diligence process. And a lot of people get put off by property investing because the amount of time and effort that goes into it up front without actually having, without actually even doing a deal. And the more experience you get, the more times you go through that process and you get the feedback and you learn from it and you improve, you'll be able to, quickly, look at a deal and understand, right, the way I look at deals now, I can pretty much find a property on Rightmove or Zoopla that would kind of meet my criteria. And then I can, what we call it, the fag packet figures, the Hamlet challenge, I can run those numbers quite quickly to understand whether that deal is going to work for me or not based on my criteria, and whether it's worth exploring further. So I wouldn't even get to the point where I book a viewing. I can just move on to the next one quite quickly. And that's the kind of place you want to be once you've done this enough times, is to really be able to understand your numbers, understand your criteria, and then go, right, yeah, this is something I'll explore further. You then put it through your calculators and your in-depth due diligence and go, right, yeah, this is something I want to explore. And then you book a viewing. So a lot of the work is done before you even get to the viewing. You don't want to be in a place where and we've probably all been there when you start out, is booking viewings and then actually realizing it was a waste of time. And when you start valuing your time more, then you won't go around wasting your time and also the agent's time, And if you're trying to build relationships, they'll soon pick up that you're wasting their time. So you don't want to get into that habit. So yeah, I think being able to quickly understand what does a deal look like, how does it work, and the nuances of it. And hopefully we've given some tips and guidance on that. So let's kind of just sort of recap then. So just from a buying perspective, what kind of properties can you buy, and how can you add value to those in order to recycle your cash as quickly as possible, so that you can buy more properties as quickly as possible, if that is the goal. And again, probably is having clarity up front on what are your property goals as well, because some people kind of get into it and they're not clear on, they just want, I want 10 properties. Okay, well, why do you want 10 properties? Is it a cash flow thing? Is it an equity thing? And you might be able to do that with 5 properties if it's a cash flow item. So it's just understanding more around what it is you're trying to achieve. So then once you've identified those properties, you bought them, you've added value, and then you're refinancing those based on a different strategy that you're going to put a long-term tenant in there, whether that be residential, HMO, serviced accommodation, or more down the commercial space. So hopefully that's been a really good and just high-level knowledge around the various types of BRR and what that means and what it looks like. Like we said, we're going to deep dive a bit further into a lot of those different areas in the future. So keep an eye out for those as they come up. But just some top tips then, Mark, now on for anyone looking to do more deals, looking to do their first deal, or looking to grow their portfolio. What top tips have you got for people to consider?
Yeah, so we've got three tips written down here. Before I go into it, I just want to sort of reiterate really is, we've obviously highlighted some of the challenges around this, but it doesn't take away from the fact that property as an investment strategy is very much up there with the best of them. It is a lot of work, it is a lot of effort, but it can be materially very rewarding over the longer term as well, and the short term as well, in fairness. So, don't want to think we're putting doom and gloom on it, but it's certainly it comes with its challenges. So we're just trying to make sure everyone's got their eyes wide open when they get into this. A few top tips really from today. Some takeaways is the valuation itself. We've not really spoken about that in any form of detail. We will do a full. I mean, that's probably 6 or 7 episodes to be fair, but valuations. Take the time to understand the valuation methodology that's going to happen on your particular deal. It will be different per deal. So that can make or break your transaction, your deal, really, if I'm honest. So take the time to understand what that looks like. I can't stress that enough. If the valuation doesn't meet up with your assumptions, you could find yourself in a bit of hot water, especially if you're using other people's money and you have to get that out of there in a time frame. So just bear that in mind. Something that is super, super simple but massively overlooked is your personal credit. Okay, whether you're a first-time investor or you've got a portfolio of 100 properties valued at 50 million plus, your personal credit still comes into play. So CCJs, defaults, it becomes, in fact, the bigger the portfolio, the harder it becomes to stay on top of your credit report because, tenants may not pay the water bill, which turns up as a default on your credit report and so on. So I can't stress enough, if you don't look after that, you're going to make your life particularly difficult to get anything done. And then the third one is coming back to the buying element. Most deals are made when on the buying process and making sure you buy at the right value or the right price. So just not being a motivated buyer. You might have to kick a lot of tires to find a deal that actually fits into your criteria, and try not to mold your criteria to fit the deal. Make the deal fit your criteria.
Yeah, 100%. I think I had an example of that on the weekend where I've got a friend of mine who's a client. He's looking to purchase his first buy-to-let investment. He's probably had 2 or 3 properties that he's had offers on and they've fallen through, and he's desperate to buy his first one. And we were at this party and he was telling me, "Oh, I'm gonna buy something in the next couple of weeks. I'm gonna buy something." I said, "Right, listen, I can see the desperation in your voice. I know you're desperate to buy something because you've got the money there burning a hole and you think it's not doing anything. But don't buy, don't be a motivated buyer." Those are the exact words I said. And his partner was there and she was like, I knew it. I've been telling him the same thing for the last couple of weeks. He's just desperate to buy something. And it's a great place to be. But it highlights a really important point that this property is going to be with you for life, really. Don't rush into it. Make sure you are buying the right property. Buying a property is an expensive endeavor in its own right. There's a lot of fees that comes with it, stamp duty and solicitors fees and buying costs, etc. Don't just buy something for the sake of it. Buy it because it meets, it's going to be a good property for you in the long term, and it's going to give you good returns, and it's going to be a solid property and not giving you headaches over long term, and then something that you just end up selling because you'll end up going backwards if you sell it within the first couple of years because of all the fees you've paid.
Yeah.
So don't be a motivated buyer. I love that one.
Yeah. No, that's. I think there's a top 3. I mean, we could probably make a super long list of that as well, but we've narrowed it down.
We'll just loop back onto the credit as well. I think that's super important. And my background dealing with residential mortgages when I first started out, before I moved to working more with investors, was, the credit's crucial. But so many people don't actually check the credit on a weekly, monthly basis and keep on top of it. I think there's 1 in 3, don't quote me on that, but I think it's something like 1 in 3 people have a mistake on their credit file. Whether that's something that's been reported wrongly, it's not been updated properly, they've had some fraud taken out on, identity fraud. So there's lots of reasons. So if you think, oh, well, I don't have any credit, then that's a great reason for you to check it, to make sure that you don't have any credit and nobody's taken out credit in your name, for instance, and or things could be reported incorrectly. So there's so many reasons to that. So just get it checked.
Yeah, on the credit report one, so I suffered something along these lines years ago now, and basically they put my address in twice, and therefore double counted everything I had, 2 mortgages on the same property, and so on and so forth. And I was like, why is my credit rating so low? I'm up to date on everything. And so anyway, I spoke to them, and it was a manual exercise. So in today's world of technology, you would have expected it to be but it was a case of, oh yeah, somebody's probably entered that incorrectly as a data entry point. And I was like, are you serious? That is such an important document or piece of information, and somebody has just keyed it in twice by mistake. They had to change straight away, and it got affected. But don't assume that this is a very technological solution. I was really surprised how manual the back end of this was then.
Yeah, and what we'll do as well is we'll drop in the show notes. We've got a link. If you don't have your credit report and if you haven't looked at it before, we'll drop a link in the show notes so that you can get a copy of your credit report and understand it a little bit better. And that's one of the first jobs we'll do with new clients is let's have a look at the credit report. Let's go through it, understand if there are any mistakes on there, make sure everything is up to date, so that we know going forward that it's going to be a good thing. And just an example of not managing this properly, it wasn't a client of ours. I was at an event and I was speaking to somebody who took out a bridging loan, and they were halfway through the project and they got lumbered with a CCJ in between after they took out the bridging loan, but before refinancing, and that left them in a hot water because then they really struggled to refinance. So again, those are things that can happen if you don't watch your credit properly and make sure you're managing and paying your car parking, your speeding fines, your car parking things. And if your friend on Facebook says, don't worry about it, it can't affect you, then they're probably wrong. Just pay the 30 quid or 60 quid fine or whatever it is and just let it go. Don't argue over the nitty gritties of small fines like that can end you up in CCJs and then end up costing you on mortgages thousands of pounds in additional interest that you don't need to pay ultimately.
Yeah, so we had a similar thing. We were refinancing, block of flats, very experienced developers. One of the the partnership or to the directors, one of them emigrated, picked up a parking fine which he wasn't aware of, obviously unable to forward the address. I think it came to about £300. We were doing about, I think in mortgages, it was about 700,000 in mortgages across 3 or 4 properties. Be pre-drawdown, pre-completion, they just lenders will just rerun a credit check to make sure all is okay. And this had appeared between application, offer, and completion. And despite their portfolios very, very strong and so on, wouldn't budge. It took about 2 weeks. Luckily, they jumped on it, got it, but not even paying it off wasn't even an option. They had to have it completely removed off the file, which, as you can imagine, is quite the challenge off the back of it. So I can't stress enough. 300 quid could have cost this a £750,000 refinance.
Yeah, great. So top tips are really understand the valuations, make sure you manage your credit and keep an eye on it and highlight any issues that may be on there and get them fixed ASAP. And, don't be a motivated buyer. But I guess that comes back to, and I think all of these things are part of your due diligence, making sure that you're prepared before you buy, a super expensive property as part of your investment plans and your portfolio. So look, let's finish there. It's been really great chatting with you, Mark, around and understanding and hopefully sharing some tips and tricks around growing a portfolio using the BRR method in order to invest with momentum and keep buying more properties or as many properties as you can with the same pot of cash ultimately, and hopefully finding the holy grail of an all money out deal. So thanks very much. I'm Gareth Morgan.
Yep, I'm Mark Watts. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Gareth.
And if you want to know more about any of these deals, or if you've got a deal that you'd like to discuss, then please chat to us at Prime Property Finance. We'd be more than happy to talk you through one of your deals, or get some terms, or give you some options on rates, etc. for any of your deals, and talk you through them and hold your hand through that process. So if you want help with that, just give us a shout. Many thanks for listening. Really appreciate it. Hope you stayed to the end. And hopefully catch you soon. Thanks. Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. We hope you have learned something and have some tips to take away. We'd be very grateful if you enjoyed the show. You could give us a review and share with anyone that you know that may be interested. And of course, subscribe to the show so you can get notified when a new episode is released. If you'd like us to answer any questions or go deeper on a specific topic, please drop us a message at primeproperty.finance. See you on the next episode.